Welcome, Tiny Hands Big Dreams, here today in our open air, on-site Ecuadorian studio. We see a lot of people preparing. It's the end of summer. It's the preparation for winter. There's schedules. There's things that have to happen.
Yeah, we look at the videos that are out there, and a lot of them are preparing for winter.
And you're canning food, and you're putting stuff away, and there's back to school. There's like winter clothes have to be found from storage.
Yeah, or even the bigger, preparing for butchering, because that usually happens in the fall and winter. And there's all of these things that happen very seasonally, and we.
Let me ask you a question. What if winter never came? Just never came. Like it just didn't. And you were just there in the season where it's warm and it's nice and and it just
kept going.
And it just keeps going. I mean, they've made a whole series of movies. I mean, remember, was it Game of Thrones? Winter is coming, right? Like, it's such a big deal. What if it's not? What if it just doesn't? So, and it's a very difficult thought to wrap your head around until actually experiencing it. And there's some things that you could say are like that. Skydiving. You haven't been skydiving?
Nope.
No. Skydiving is one of those things you can imagine it. You can picture it. You can see videos of it. You jump out of the plane and like there's wind. You're like, ooh, and you understand it until you get there, and you stand in the doorway of a plane, and there is nothingness below you. Your brain does not properly comprehend the I'm going to step into the nothing. And suddenly it's very real and very different, and then you understand that is an activity.
So moving to a wildly different place. And I think we had a concept, of course, on what it would be like to live without seasons. I like winter. I have always liked winter. From like a week of winter. Winter's nice. A white Christmas is nice. It's great. And then I'm done.
You like winter foods.
I like winter foods, but more than that, I liked winter either as a child or as an adult who didn't have to go deal with the garden and the animals and the things and the stuff and it's frost and the thing and
black ice
and the
how's that neat?
That's great. And the frozen rabbit waters and we've done that.
The car that won't start, the driveway you can't get up or down.
And that's not saying that winter's a terrible thing and it's awful.
No.
It's just wasn't our preference.
I enjoyed the crap out of it.
If I lived a different life, I probably would want somewhere where there were seasons. I do like seasons. From a self-sufficient, homesteading, off-grid, etc., all the buzzwords perspective, living without seasons is kind of amazing.
It kind of just is. And we're now into this. We've been on this property a couple years.
2 years next month.
We're still rolling on the first summer, fall maybe for 2 years, and we just had a sprinkle of rain. It's like the first, and it's like a sprinkle. It broke the dust, which is the first dry spell we've had in like 2 years, and it's been a couple weeks.
And I mean, to be fair, specifically where we are in southern Ecuador, we do have seasons. They're just not seasons in the way that most people are used to. Our seasons are like the wet and dry season, and they are just based on the amount of moisture falling from the sky, and they also aren't super regular.
Yeah.
Or at least they haven't been for us in the last 2 years.
Weather patterns are moving around. By the official numbers of daylight, this is south of the equator, winter. Southern countries are having their winter, while north of the equator has their summers. It's the opposite. It's just the tilt.
And we are just below the equator.
Yeah.
A smidge.
So technically, this is we just passed like a month ago, like the least amount of light of the year, the shortest days, and then we'll go the other way.
So we wanted to talk about. I guess there's two different parts of learning, experiencing living without seasons. because it is a strange learning process that we didn't anticipate. There's the practical stuff, which I guess I was more, I don't know, aware of. I was, I don't know, I just thought like, oh yeah, okay, there's no seasons, there's no winter, that's cool. The growing cycles, they, while you just think, oh, you can just grow things, it's a very weird thing to get used to if you have already had a garden, had a homestead where there are seasons. When you start seeds in like February or something, and then you have to start seeds so that they can go out because you're battling first and last frost dates always. That's just
and the more north you are, Canada, Alaska, the more you are cramming into the cold side indoors, and then hoop houses and things to try to cheat another few weeks or a month out of it.
If you miss any of those dates or you have something fail, you are simply out of luck.
That was your seasonal chance.
And luckily for us, that's not the case. So when the tomatoes fail, and you're like, tomatoes fail again, because you're learning a property and soil and pests and things, which we have done or are trying to do. Okay, I'll just start more tomatoes at whatever month it is, because who cares? It doesn't really matter a whole lot.
The sunlight's the same pretty much around the year within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The rain changes, the temperature
fluctuates a tiny
bit. Yeah.
Not mostly, drastically.
Mostly just rain. There's more rain sometimes a year, less other times. If you had yourself some sort of cover or greenhouse, you negate the rain part.
By a greenhouse, we mean an Ecuadorian style greenhouse, which is not a fully enclosed glass greenhouse.
It's a plastic roof with a top vent, and then usually a screen stripe, and then plastic to the ground.
Yeah, and some don't even have the sides. Some are just to break the rain.
Yeah.
So that's just something interesting when it comes to growing things. There's just no seasons. It also means things will just continue.
And this is something we're struggling with because, again, we've had problems with soils and bugs and things.
But we have seen people grow giant hot pepper trees.
Trees
like
shrubs,
woody
trees. And you look at it and you're like, you have 118 peppers now. And it's still just goes and it goes, and it's 9 feet tall and 6 feet across, and it has a trunk. You couldn't even chomp it down with loppers.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. And it's something we're going to play around with more of. Things that were used to being annual, could they just be perennial?
Grain crops, sorghum. We lost the first crop. Just ants actually ate all the seeds off the thing before we realized what was going on. But it doesn't die. It's a grass. You cut it.
I cut it and it just regrew from the base. I'm like, there's a lot of things that will simply continue to grow or regrow in a way that we're not used to because there's no season to kill it. There's no end to some of these crops, which also affects animals. I know one of the biggest things with the self-sufficiency that people really struggle with is you want to grow all of the food for your animals, but if you live somewhere where there is any significant winter, especially a very long winter, you now not only have to grow all summer a pasture, you also have to grow for the winter, and then you have to store it. And that's a lot of things that have to all go correctly so that you have enough food for your animals.
Has to make it, has to dry. You know, it
has to grow, it has to dry. You have to be able to store it.
You got to bail it at the right time. You got to.
Yeah. We don't need to store food for animals for the winter because there's no winter. There's just green stuff.
And that also that gets into how the culture, the people who live there develop.
Yeah.
And how they exist. Most everybody in the United States came from or are in a culture where there is a winter, where there is food preservation, where there is. What if there wasn't?
Yeah.
People here have developed differently. There's.
Yeah.
It's just different. So we get into what are your favorite, like, and if you never thought about it, what are your foods that came from cold cultures. Anything that's not fresh, stuff in cans, jars, salted foods, meats, cured meats, the entire array of cured meats.
We're born out of necessity.
Yeah, but does not exist here really, unless it's an imported specialty, kind of a taste thing.
But from a local Ecuadorian standpoint, they don't exist.
Yeah,
they're not part of the Ecuadorian culture.
You go to Poland, and the average people will have like some sausages and things and cured meats hanging. That's just their food.
Food preservation just doesn't exist here. It's not part of the traditional culture. It didn't need to be.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things like food is different here for us, and we're not saying we're being traditional in our food either. We eat what we want to eat, but what we eat, it used to be seasonal. I mean, you hear all the eat seasonally.
Sure.
I don't disagree with the theory behind eating seasonally. I just want to eat what I want to eat, so I wanted to move somewhere where I could eat whatever I wanted all the time, and that was my cheat.
Yeah.
And now I can eat seasonally, and I can eat everything all the time.
No, there's
a little bit.
There's an up and down swell to that. Certain things just sort of like pick a season. Your citrus like sort of like does its thing and then doesn't.
But there's a lot of things that you'll get what would be one crop per year. We get like two instead.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. I don't have a schedule for some of that.
Deciduous trees here. You don't really have a schedule. We have these really pretty trees over here, and they leaf out and they look beautiful. And a couple months later, they drop them all, and then they do it again. Drop them all, and do it again. I'm like,
what are you doing?
Do you do that like 4 times a year? Are you lost? Like what?
But they're from here; they get it. I don't know, which is kind of an interesting thing. The animals. I'm part of all these groups of animal husbandry, but from a seasonal standpoint, I'm like, man, the goats just give birth when they give birth. I don't plan it based on a season. Most people do for good reason. You don't want, summer, you can have parasite problems. Dead of winter is just dead of winter, and whether you want to deal with that or not. But you don't really have to worry either way. So it just kind of happens. Same with the pigs. Like,
yeah, you can just sort of breed when they want, and they have when they want, and it's a little less critical there.
Butchering, the same thing.
Sadly, there's no cold season.
Yes, would it be nice if there was a cooler season to do the butchering? Yes.
It's a little trickier when it's
just cross our fingers for at least a cloudy day.
Are we going to be in the low 70s today, or are we going to be in the high 70s today?
Yeah.
And lack of sun.
But we found ways around that, and it's a relatively minor point, but it's definitely something that we're like, well, when do we do that? Clothes.
So there is totes in the container that we open and go,
I don't need that.
I remember that stuff. Those are good clothes. And we close it again, and they still smell like when they were washed years ago.
Sweatshirts and jackets, which we didn't want to get rid of. Because like, I don't know what life is going to bring us, so we're going to take them. I don't know if we'll ever touch them again.
I have worn jeans, or what's left of them, and a t-shirt every day.
Pretty much.
When we were in Loja, I think there was a couple of days I broke out a long sleeve shirt. Or I had like a sweatshirt.
Yeah. You don't even remember what to call it.
What's that thing? Yeah.
That thing.
Sweatshirt.
Evenings get a little cool.
It sits in the van in case I have to go on a trip somewhere and suddenly cold.
But for the most part, we just don't need those things. And that's also kind of nice. You don't have that, remember the weird in-between seasons where you're like, oh, you change clothes like 5 times a day.
Is it sweater weather or this weather? Is it? Yeah.
No, it's just kind of always the same.
And to give you, so we're still, because house, see the house up there? Hi, house. It's getting there. Slowly. We still live in tents. And there's only a handful of days where you wanted another blanket.
We've had some cooler nights in the last few weeks.
But otherwise, that's kind of it. Our shower is just hanging out the back of the house. And
there are no walls.
the house has a fabric plastic wall, so you can't like there's privacy except for everything up the hill. Like we literally, when you shower, you step behind the house and you can see the entire uphill view thing, and you just shower there. Sometimes there's wind, and you're like,
sometimes you're like, oh, maybe the walls would be nice.
But it's not like you need to be like Bear Grylls or something and like survive it. Like
it's lovely.
It's sort of interesting to think about and that leads into lifestyle. Houses. You probably live in a house that has insulated walls everywhere. You probably have double pane windows because we're outdoors. We have screen around our house.
That's more than most people here.
Most people here have window holes in their house. If you get to Loja, they have windows. It's colder there.
Sometimes we were in, it doesn't have windows.
Yeah, mostly houses are open. If you look at like top of the wall to the ceiling, there's just a big gap. That's why they call it a ceiling. It's sealed. They don't have those. They just have the roof and the inside. And there's no heating. There's no air conditioning. There's no expense to build those systems into the house. There's no expense to pay for the energy to use those systems. We're like, well, that's significant.
It really informs how you build a house here.
When you don't have to think about those kind of things, there's a lot more options of like, you can be sort of whimsical.
We're not intending to have actual windows in our house because glass is expensive and heavy and in the shapes that someone else made it.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
So we don't need to, and it's something that's kind of interesting. It's not something I ever really considered in the move to somewhere where there isn't a winter. I didn't consider, hey, we don't need windows. How cool is that, though?
You don't actually. Yeah, I mean, yeah, just a little bit to keep the occasional flying insects out.
Yeah.
So it affects a lot of things, and it's not something we really understood.
Yeah, the cultural side of it is interesting. We were talking about this the other night, and we were kind of like figuring out this video. We didn't try to like talk it out a little bit so we're less of bumbling fools. And it wasn't, I knew the practical side. I understood there weren't going to be seasons that you have to grow in, all of those things, but I don't think I realized how much the lack of seasons changes a culture or builds a culture, because I had never experienced it, and it's not something that really people talk about that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a lot of connection made between the lack of that seasonal pressure to the general, I don't know, lifestyle, culture, mentality.
And I'd read about people that had gone from Europe, United States to like the Caribbean islands and other places. You start to get close to the equator, and they talk about, well, there's island time. Like you just can't get anybody to do things on time. They were German specifically, and they're like, I said to be here at this time, and they're like, they were 2.5 hours late, and they're just losing their mind over it. You know, in New York, if you have a meeting with somebody and they're 5 minutes late, it's a nasty voicemail and you're off. That's it. Boom, you're done. Here,
well, they call it mañana time here.
They go, yeah, I'll be there mañana. Oh, which
mañana has multiple meanings. Mañana means tomorrow. Mañana means morning. Mañana means sometime soon-ish, maybe.
Yeah, and then some things can come up and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get back to that, and it's gonna come around. Like you'll send somebody or you ask somebody to do a thing, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get this for you, and then days go by, and you're like, and so you're like, are you doing it? Are you doing it? When are you gonna tell me the answer? You said you'd have it. And they're like, and then all of a sudden, like a week later, they're like, oh, here's that answer. Like, wait, you've really been working on this whole time?
And it is a very different culture.
There is not the ticking clock. Kind of in the back of the head of the season of things like the day is going to this and that. There is always tomorrow. Tomorrow looks like today. Yes. So there's not this like, we have to get this done. We have to get some before like the rains come, the winter, the things, and then we can't do this or we can't pour concrete. Or we have this hard schedule.
Maybe a little bit, for like the road crews really can't do things when it's raining. There's a little bit, but the general culture is just honestly a lot more laid back. At least in rural Ecuador. I'm sure someone's going to say the city is different. Cities are different.
Yep.
Cities are cities. But as
We are
a general...
talking non-city people.
Yeah. As a general culture, so much more laid back. And that doesn't mean that people don't... I think some people took that, or have taken that as like a negative, or they're lazy. I don't think that's it at all.
My neighbors are up at like 5, 6 a.m.
And they work.
And they go out and they'll cut things, and they'll feed their animals, they'll milk their cows, or this. They'll start doing maintenance or things. You know, by the time we make it out to go do something at like 9 or 10 in the morning, sometimes they're back on their porch having a second just to relax, and then they go out again, and then they come back again in the afternoon and like sit through like the hottest part of the day, and they just...
But there isn't that push to get things done, because there's nothing that's going to happen if it doesn't get done, for the most part. Obviously there's exceptions, but
yeah,
so much of that push comes from, oh, winter is coming, oh, summer is coming.
You see that with houses, and people are like building a house, and we've been watching some of these houses, they've been slow rolling them for like years now, and they come out and there's another row of cinder blocks. Okay, all right, and then
sometimes they'll sit for months
and months, and then it comes out and like, oh, there's like 2 rows. Oh, you worked for a couple days, and they just and it's packing slowly, but it just sits there, and then they come back and they add some more, and then they don't, and then and eventually it will be there. So we get into what we're sort of, now we are not sociologists. I don't know, whatever the official word of people that study cultures and people. There's a word for that.
I don't know.
Meh. We're not those people.
I like to pretend to be them.
Yeah.
Could play one on YouTube.
Sure. But let's just call it, for our purposes, a generational culture.
Mm-hmm. Things are not marked by years or seasons.
They're marked by generations. You start this project, you work this field, and you get all the stumps out of it, you get it all cleared so that you can have a pasture for cows, which then your children will take over. You build a house and you build a floor, and then that's it for 10, 15 years. Then eventually you have kids, things. You get some money, you got a good job, you can build a second floor. That might be it for your generation. And then after that, your children, when they get a good job, may all of a sudden have the money to do the third floor on the house. And sometimes houses just sort of stack up. They were also never engineered or intended to be that sort of high, and it scares me a little bit.
It mostly seems to work out.
So far. Yeah.
But yeah, things are not marked by seasons or even years. Which is just a very different... It's just a very different way of moving through time.
It is.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, do I love the mañana culture? No, my very type A, you said you'd be here at this time and do this thing. Brain, it kills me.
Wait until you try to get your stove repaired.
I don't want to talk about the stove. I still never got it fixed.
I'll be there tomorrow.
Okay, I'll be here.
Show up and fix the stove.
You think I'll be here between 7 and,
Comcast, I think, made that famous, yeah.
The cable companies,
8 and 4.
And you think that's bad. No, it's just sometimes.
Unless we're not.
Or that we might not show up. Is that difficult from our very American standpoint and how we grew up? Yes. It's a difficult mental shift. I don't think I'll ever probably be there 100% of just no, whatever. I just don't think my brain will ever be there.
Yeah. I remember with the oven guy, I turned into a bit of a jagoff with that, and I would just sit there and hold the oven lighting button down and take video of it. Click, 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 poof, poof. Click, 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 poof, poof. And I'd just send him that every day or two, oh, here it is again. And I'd send him these video messages, and finally he showed up.
And there's a balance between, I think that there's a certain level of you have to push sometimes to get things done, but you also have to realize that it is a different culture. And there's a balance. I don't know if we're good at the balance yet.
No, and we see it just in everyday life. You go to the store, you go to the hardware store, and I'll be talking to the guy and this and that. If I'm in a hurry and I'm asking for stuff, he helps me. I'm asking a question, a thing. I'm like, well, I need some wire. And he's like, okay. And I get that. And he's like, anything else? I'm like, well, I kind of need. And then he's helping the person behind me because they're just like, blah, blah, blah. They just step around me and just start asking for stuff.
That's true.
And now I'm waiting.
Which kind of goes against some of the slower pace.
And I'm like, I was first. You're
right.
You're cutting in front of me. And then sometimes another person. And it's sort of, people just walk up and they literally like will step in front of you things. And they sort of just triage customers based on their level of like hurriedness.
Yeah.
Like you're on this faster schedule, then I'll do it.
Which is interesting because that does sort of go against some of the slower pace.
Well, it's because there's, the different styles and.
Yeah. And I wonder if some of that's crossover between like the very rural mentality and a little bit more of the city, faster moving.
Yeah. And I'll come up sometimes asking, questions, things, but then somebody comes up from a job site down the street, clearly, like they're working on something, they're dirty, they're covered in oil, they're like, I need this part, and like, and they get preference. Okay. I actually wasn't in that kind of hurry, so maybe that was maybe it was spot on. Yeah, it's just different.
Yeah, the lack of seasons, the lack of winter, is kind of fascinating.
So stop and ruminate on that. What if time essentially stopped where you're at? The clothes you're wearing now is the same level of clothing you're going to wear for the rest of your life, and the heavier stuff you just never get out again, and it's never going to get cold. And it's never. And just think on that for a minute. Like, how much would my life be different? Because the entire society, the culture, the thing is based on the seasons, based on the sun, based on our movement through the universe. What if it didn't? And it's really hard to grasp that until you're either immersed in it or you sit down and have yourself a moment.
Yeah.
And just sort of try to picture it. Kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the point. It was just like, it was something interesting that we were discussing and we were thinking.
Ruminating on.
Ruminating. Like a goat.
Like a goat. We'll call these cud conversations.
Ew.
Just sitting around chewing on them.
Ew.
Had to go gross there. All right.
You did. So yeah, no winter.
No winter. And there's the sun again. Well, thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting. Let us know what you think in the comments. Please have discussion. We have a good time with it. See you for the next one. Welcome, Tiny Hands, Big Dreams, here in our outdoor on-site Ecuadorian studio. All right, we'll try it again.
No, why do you have to try it again? I'm not going to take you seriously when you do that. You can say it and I can react correctly. Why do you keep saying you're going to do it?
All right.